According to the Maryland State Conference of the NAACP, Maryland has violated Black students' constitutional rights by failing to provide them with the resources and support that they need to succeed academically. The Maryland NAACP cites various issues, including inadequate funding, understaffing, and the lacking of resources for students with special needs. It also alleges that the same Maryland district has engaged in discriminatory practices that have disproportionately affected Black students. In particular, in Baltimore, 75% of the student body is Black. Baltimore City had 93% of third through eighth graders below grade level in math and found 23 schools with no student performing at grade level. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump joined a lawsuit against Baltimore City Schools that accused the school system of wasting tax dollars and failing to educate generations of students. The NAACP calls for systemic changes to be made to policies and practices to ensure all students have the access to education by offering plans to hold a conference for all Maryland school systems on June 15th and 16th. I want to bring the panel in on this discussion because I think this is crucial, particularly given Shelley's conversation on Republican support for school choice earlier. So for Rebecca, well, do you think that this lawsuit and this effort against Baltimore schools will be successful? And if so, will this be something that can be replicated in school districts around the country because they are not alone in this issue?
Well, here's the thing. Even if we have the broader school choice debate, not every student is going to go to a charter school. Not every student is going to go to a private school. We're still going to have a significant portion of our students in public schools. So if we're saying that we should have access to free public education, then the federal government, state governments, local governments have to do everything they can to make sure that the education that's being provided is adequate and that is not a disservice if you are poor or if you are Blacker. It has to be education that is free and accessible by all if we're saying that that's a priority in our country.
And on that point, Mustafa, here we are 70 plus years after Brown versus the Board of Education. And even in cities where you have a majority Black population, you have a Black, elected officials, mayors, on down the line, we still dealing with this issue of substandard schools in the Black community. What is the solution? And we haven't found one by now. And as Rebecca said, school choice sounds good as long as you're one of the kids that makes it into the private or parochial school. For the rest, they're left to die on the vine. Why is it so hard to tackle this subject?
Well, in many instances, our schools are located in sacrifice zones. So that means that we have to take a holistic approach to education. And that also means, because I've spent some time in the Baltimore schools, and there are kids who have different ways of learning, but because we have created sort of this conveyor belt, we just move kids through without them actually being able to actually break things down, use them in a real world way, and really gain a better understanding. So that means that even though we have this case that's going on, we've really got to look at the system of education and where are the gaps and the breaks that exist there, especially for our kids. We got to make sure the representation matters. And in many instances there in the Baltimore school system, we do have other Black teachers that are there. But there are a number of different dynamics that also go behind that, and helping also those teachers to continue to have the additional growth of skills that's necessary to operate here in the 21st century. And then we'll just tie it into the last session, where we've got to make sure that these young children who are going to move into adulthood are prepared for a much more competitive world. So that means that we've really got to take a hard look, and then we've got to make some really strong choices and then have the resources. And resources are not just money to help them to be able to succeed.
But Mustafa, just on that point, bounces right back to you. I don't think it's being conveyed properly in American media that the age of American exceptionalism is over. We are behind and we are losing pace. We are behind. Our students right now graduate behind almost every student in Europe. Quite frankly, they graduate behind almost every student in Canada. They graduate behind almost every student in Mumbai and in Nigeria and China. They graduate behind almost every student in Japan. can. Well, why is it that we can't have political conversations that are centered around actually improving education without moving into kind of some of these ridiculous conversations? Ron DeSantis wants to ban books because they make the kids gay. Glenn Youngkin wants to ban the books because they make white people feel bad. We don't have actual conversations centered on fixing the education system. How can we actually get to the point of directing our attention towards solutions and not just rhetoric?
Well, we've got to finally realize that education actually helps to strengthen our country when it's done properly. Education also expands your mind. Education also helps you to understand that you have power. And of course, we understand when we start talking about power dynamics, people get real nervous, because if you have an educated community or an educated body, then that means that they are going to want better things for themselves. And there's going to be a higher level of expectation, and that scares some people. But if we don't get our educational system correct in this country, we are going to fall further and further behind. I have been in South America, Central America, Europe, and Africa, and you would be surprised, and Robert, as you shared, the level of learning that happens at such a young age that in many instances, folks who are in high school in this country can't compete with folks who are in 8th grade or 7th grade in other countries. So this is the moment for us to actually do the right thing and make sure that we are putting together a 21st century educational system.
On that point, well, me and my wife were at this beach in Phuket one time, and there was this couple next to us, an interracial couple, and the daughter had never seen a black person before. So the daughter asked the mother in French if she could come talk to my wife. I took 6 years of French, so I barely understood the child. She was like 4 years old. And then she went and spoke to her father in German and asked him. And then she came and spoke to us in English. And then she spoke to the waitress in Thai. So when I talk about American schools being behind, I think that if you haven't gotten out of America and seen the level of education that these children have and with far fewer resources in other places, you won't understand just how far we are from being able to keep up with this next generation. And Eugene, you come previously, you're a reformed and retired conservative, but I think that part of the issue is that we the conservative side of the aisle, it seems to, other than school choice and an anti-woke agenda, we don't really get policy out of that side of the aisle. What could be a conservative policy solution actually helping our educational system? Because Baltimore is not alone.
Well, the thing is this, right? So I'm actually going to speak from somebody that actually lives in the Metro Baltimore area about what's actually going on. So you did run down, in Baltimore City, where this lawsuit's taking place, where there's been a lot of discussion about the impact the schools is having, the lack of performance from the school system. First and foremost, Maryland has localized school boards, which means that, hey, your county elects a school board that has a wide range of autonomy over both budget, performance, and policy of the local school system. On top of that, the Maryland legislature, by law, essentially provides parity within funding. So let's say, for example, so school systems are largely funded by property taxes, right? So let's say, hey, Baltimore City, they're able to only fund $7,000, and the state, will come in and fund that other $8,000. And that's typically what happens in Baltimore City. The state provides an overwhelming amount of funding compared to, let's say Baltimore County or Anne Arundel County, surrounding counties of Baltimore City. But hey, let's say a poor white county like Somerset or Prince Anne County, both of those, receive like parity funding the same way Baltimore City does. But I think if we're going to have an honest conversation about what's going on with Baltimore City Schools, I think that conversation starts with, hey, that these schools are run by a 100% Democrat school board, and supported by a overwhelming supermajority, filibuster-proof majority, do whatever they want majority of Democrats in both the state house and state legislature. There's a false idea that governor, Republican or Democrat, has control over that state budget. No, that state budget really rests within the hands of the state legislature. So I think if any conversation is going to be about fixing the Baltimore City schools, it's going to have to start with fixing about who actually runs the schools.
Mm. On that point, both our friend Kim Klacik, she had a video on Instagram the other day where she made the point that the city of Baltimore has banned plastic bags at the grocery store, for example, or has done many of these other things they consider part of the left-wing agenda, but hasn't focused on things such as education and crime. Why do you think in many of these cities that have, as you said, super majority Democratic populations, where they can do what they want, as you said, they aren't focusing in on many of these key areas that are necessary for the general function of the city, but then have time for, we're going to ban plastic bags and some of these more esoteric things that sound better?
Well, the thing is this, right? And this is what I was actually going to say to Shelley earlier. When it comes to both parties, when they have the majority to do something, they actually don't do shit and nothing. Roland shall say shit, but Roland's not here. They don't do nothing, right? So Republicans had a majority. They could have enacted school choice. They could have built a wall. They could have did whatever gun reform they wanted. For 2 years, they had a complete majority with Donald Trump as president, right? Complete control, did nothing. For decades in Maryland, Democrats have had complete control, but did nothing. In Baltimore City, they could do whatever they want. I mean, literally have a 100% Democrat city council with a Democrat mayor, Democrat school board, Democrat sheriff, Democrat police captain, can do whatever they want when it comes to crime and education, right? Whatever solution they want, they have complete control over the budget, but they decide not to. Why? Because, hey, when it comes to the next election, I'm able to come in and run on, hey, I'm going to make it safer and I'm going to make education better while doing nothing, and voters forget every 4 years that the same person or this person that was endorsed by this person, or this person that was endorsed by this person that happened to be a former mayor or former city council president, made the same promise and didn't deliver on it. It's a game. It's one big, huge game. But and that's why every generation you get somebody that actually comes in and does something. Oh, we herald them as a hero because they actually did something. But in the reality of it, when people have these majorities, they don't do what they actually promise. Sometimes people do. And in the case of Ron DeSantis, he told you he was going to come in and fight this woke or whatever, and he's actually doing it or whatever. Now, I don't agree with it, but he's actually doing what he said he's going to do with the majority that was handed to him. If Democrats actually care about black people, and I say this for Republicans too, you actually care about the constituency that you beg to represent, because that's what campaigning is, literal begging, right? So if you're actually going to run for a year and a half and beg somebody to give you power and let you serve in office, actually deliver on the needs that these people have. And that goes for Democrats, that goes for Republicans, it goes for black electors, it goes for white electors. Point blank period.
And Rebecca, just kind of piggybacking on what Eugene said, we're going into 2024. As we talked about earlier, Democrats probably aren't going to have a primary field. But how can we ensure that education, particularly in big cities and in urban areas, has to be the central point of any Democratic campaign? It can't be a back burner issue anymore.
There is a lot of truth to what Eugene is saying. Because bottom line, there are many issues in our country, whether it's local or whether it's on a grand scale and it's national. And sometimes, regardless of party, we see that the needle isn't moved on actually fixing the problems. Sometimes we see a Band-Aid, like even when it comes to how Biden pushed to continue to pause student loans and then talked about student loan reform instead of talking about, hey, why is the federal government giving free money to private businesses to charge 6, 7, 8, or even more percentage points for people to be able to get an education in this country. So, Eugene is right. We have to think about who is profiting when we have failing systems. This reminds me, I think, of season 3 of The Wire that specifically talked about Baltimore public schools. Who is actually profiting here when our children in Baltimore City aren't receiving an adequate education? Who is profiting here? And I think once we figure out who makes money off of a failing system, I think that's how we start to get reform, when we figure out what is the money component here.
You're absolutely correct. And no system and no society can survive if they do not prepare their children for the future. It's almost as if we feel that if these children just survive to get out of high school, we have somehow done our jobs. That is not the case. We are in a fast-moving, fast-paced society. There are young children all around the globe who want the standard of living that we have here in the United States of America. And if you want a quick analogy, just look at the last 5 MVPs in the NBA in basketball. They're all foreign born. Why?
Hey,
because
Jimmy B putting the to that white boy now. Come on now.
Look, I'm not talking about, I'm not getting into a debate on sports, but the point is that these people, everyone's coming from overseas. They are hungry. They are fighting harder. The lead that America thought that we had in the 1950s does not exist anymore. We have to take education seriously for the next generation. And I'll take some action on that bet with you later on after the show. Just hit me up. We get some money going on that.